Hey everybody, welcome back to the final money production of the 2024 school year. AP scores don't come out till July, but I'm going to give you the answers to the FRQs right now. So one last time, hit that music. And last thing before we start, please promise me to remember that it's just a test score. And if you didn't get the best score possible, that's okay. This test doesn't define you. Alright, so there are two versions of the FRQ released, so without any further ado, let's get right to it. Okay, in part A, congressional oversight, that's what we're seeing here. They're holding hearings, they're making people testify, all that kind of stuff. In part B, now we talk about the media's role, and I thought gatekeeper and agenda setting were the ones that made the most sense. So with this role, they can bring more attention to the hearings, causing them to become a bigger issue to the public, and depending on how they frame it, it could lead to more power for Congress if the public demands accountability from the executive branch, or it might decrease Congress's power if the public thinks that Congress is overreaching or misusing its power. Another possibility is the watchdog role, where investigative journalism leads to Congress using its oversight powers. In part C, first define retrospective voting. Once you've done that, the idea is that a retrospective voter would be more likely to vote for the opposing party in the following election because they might blame the president for the problems within the Commerce Department regarding the census. All right, FRQ 2, part A, 1988. This is just finding it on the graph. In part B, we're describing a difference. There's almost always more Democratic women candidates for Senate than there are Republican women candidates. Another possibility is that the number of women candidates for the Senate is increasing in both parties. All right, part C wants us to draw a conclusion, so we could say something like women more often vote Democratic, so there's a larger pool of Democratic women to become Senate candidates than there is for Republicans. Or we can focus on ideology. Democrats are often more liberal and more focused on gender diversity, so that might lead to this as well. And part D, the increasing number of women candidates for Senate might encourage more women to participate in politics. This could include things like voting, making political contributions, getting out the vote, running for office, stuff like that. All right, FRQ 3, part A, the civil liberty common in both is free speech. All right, part B, our first point is for describing the facts of Schenck. A man was arrested for distributing leaflets opposing the military draft, and this violated the Espionage Act. Second point is for now explaining how these led to different rulings. In Cohen, a man was arrested for displaying an obscene anti-war statement because it was illegal to disturb the peace by offensive conduct. And the court said that speech couldn't be limited merely because it might be offensive conduct. In Schenck, the court said that speech that creates a clear and present danger can be restricted. Part C, we start with talking about limited government, that government has some power, that power is not absolute. And this is reflected in Cohen because the court ruled in favor of civil liberties and they restricted governmental power. All right, and FRQ 4, argument essay. I gave you a couple of thesis statements, one for each. Remember, we just need to make the claim and then we have to provide a line of reasoning. So hopefully it looks something like this. And remember, this is about participatory democracy, so we should be emphasizing how citizens have an active role in participating in government and politics. And briefly, just looking at a few ways to use the required documents. Federalist number 10 you could use for either side, talking about factions, a larger public. Having a larger public means more factions, and this is how we avoid a tyranny of the majority. The First Amendment we could also use for both sides. Freedom of assembly to join an interest group, to participate in demonstrations, free speech to spread political ideas, and again, as part of either an interest group or social movement. Letter from Birmingham Jail, pretty clearly we use for social movements as he calls for direct citizen action, civil disobedience, again, encouraging marches, protests, demonstrations as part of a social movement to change policy. All right, and next up, the second FRQ set. All right, FRQ 1, all about the EPA. The first answer, part A, is about discretionary authority, how that allows the EPA to choose how to implement environmental laws made by Congress. So again, make sure you reference the scenario. Now, a second answer is possibly going to be accepted, and that's rulemaking and regulatory authority. Personally, I think that it should work. It allows the EPA to reinterpret laws. For example, how they change rules from one administration to the next. The thing is, the prompt says describe the power that the EPA used, so that kind of implies that there's only one right answer. So I'm not totally sure if they're going to accept that or not. Part B, remember we have to relate it back to our answer in A. We have to reference the scenario. Three main answers. The president can issue executive orders. That makes instructions to the EPA. The president can nominate a new head of the EPA who's going to be favorable to their policy agenda. And presidential ideology, authority, and influence can also affect how the EPA uses its power. Part C, the main answer is going to be congressional oversight, Congress holding hearings, requiring high-ranking EPA officials to testify, conducting investigations. They can use their power of the purse to withhold funding or to increase funding if they like what the EPA is doing. They can also pass new legislation. They could use the Congressional Review Act, and they can definitely make laws that overturn or supersede EPA regulations, give them new instructions, limitations, all that kind of stuff. All right, FRQ 2 about federal spending. Part A, the type of spending that is the greatest percentage is mandatory spending. Part B, our trend is that mandatory spending is becoming an increasingly large share of federal spending, and discretionary authority is becoming a smaller share of federal spending over time. Part C, we're drawing a conclusion. This one's a little bit tricky. I'm not totally sure if this is what they're going for, but I gave you two possibilities. Congress has prioritized entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, and that's part of mandatory spending. over discretionary budget items like defense and education. Or maybe as more people qualify for programs like Social Security and Medicare because they're getting older, mandatory spending has become a larger share of federal spending. This limits Congress's power to make proportional increases to discretionary programs like defense and education. And Part D about how interest groups could respond, well, we have their functions. So a group that supports these trends, they might use those methods to ensure that Congress continues funding their programs, while a group that supports more discretionary spending, they might use their methods to convince Congress to change their behavior and to make more room in the budget for things like education and defense. All right, FRQ 3, the core comparison, the clause common in both is the Commerce Clause. The first point in Part B is for describing the facts in Lopez. A person was arrested for violating the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act by bringing a gun to school. The second point, we have to do a lot more. We have to compare the two cases. So in Katzenbach, we first describe the facts and then say how the court upheld the Civil Rights Act for several reasons, including that discrimination was a national issue and that the restaurant purchased about half its food from an out-of-state supplier. So the restaurant affected interstate commerce and could be regulated by Congress. In Lopez, however, the court held that guns at school do not substantially affect interstate commerce, and therefore this was an overreach of Congress's Commerce Clause powers. In Part C, we have to connect this decision to natural rights. So natural rights, we talk about fundamental rights of all people that cannot be arbitrarily taken away. So maybe something like how the decision in Katzenbach reflects natural rights by upholding the constitutionality of a law that banned discrimination and promoted equality in public accommodations. All right, and FRQ 4, the argument essay. So you have a couple of thesis statements here. We're talking about Congress versus the president, so make sure you choose a side and then have your line of reasoning. As far as the documents go, Federalist 51 is perfect because it's all about the branches, so checks and balances, separation of powers, limited government, no branch becoming too powerful. Those are main ideas there, and then connect it to Congress or the president. Federalist 70 argues for an energetic executive that can act quickly in moments of crisis, also says that public opinion is a more effective check on the president, and also says that Congress should be slow and deliberate to act. And Article 1 is all about the powers of Congress, so we can just pick a couple that have to do with domestic policy, things like taxation, budget power, and the ability to regulate interstate commerce. So what do you think? Do you agree with my answers? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching not only this video, but my videos all year long. I really can't thank you enough. And if you have friends taking AP Gov next year, why not tell them about my channel? I wish all the best for you in the future, and one last time, say it with me, this has been a La Money production.